The planet was older than any human could truly fathom, its surface littered with ruins that whispered secrets of forgotten civilizations. Area Wren stood on the edge of a vast cliff, staring out into the horizon, the wind howling around her, as her team spread out across the rocky landscape searching for anything of significance. The mission was simple: catalog the ancient ruins and send back the data to the Council. It was just another routine survey. But as she walked through the crumbling remains of an ancient temple, she felt something different, an unease that crawled under her skin. The air itself seemed thicker, as if something was watching them. Her footsteps echoed through the stone halls, the walls decorated with strange carvings that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. She wasn't sure if it was the light playing tricks on her, or if the place itself was alive in some way. The markings were unlike anything she had seen before, some shapes resembling stars and planets, others resembling symbols that didn't belong in any known language of the galaxy. At the end of the hall, she found a stone door etched with the same symbols as the walls. It was sealed shut, but Aria's curiosity overpowered any caution she had, and with a firm push the door creaked open. Inside, the chamber was dark except for the faint glow of something in the center. A pedestal of stone stood in the middle of the room with an object resting on top of it. Aria approached cautiously, her breath catching in her throat as she saw what lay before her. It was a small device, no larger than her hand, but unlike anything she had ever encountered. It had a metallic sheen with shifting colors that seemed to flow across its surface. It pulsed gently, as if alive. She reached out with trembling fingers to touch it. The moment her hand made contact, a sudden surge of energy coursed through her body. Her vision blurred, as if her mind was being pulled into another realm. She saw flashes of impossible landscapes shifting in and out of focus, stars collapsing into black holes, galaxies colliding in slow motion. But then the flashes stopped, and she was back in the chamber, her heart racing, her body tense. She pulled her hand away from the device, but it didn't stop pulsing. It seemed to call to her from the very depths of her mind. She stepped back from the pedestal, trying to steady herself, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It was as if the device had unlocked something inside her, something primal and ancient, a connection to something bigger than herself. She turned to look at her crew, but they were still outside the chamber, unaware of what had just happened. Aria knew that this discovery was more than just an ancient artifact. It was a key to something that no one could have predicted, something that could change the course of human history. If she could understand what this device truly was, it might explain why humanity had always been so different from the other species of the galaxy, why they were able to survive where others failed. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that unlocking the device's secrets could come with a cost she wasn't sure she was ready to pay. With a final glance at the glowing object, Aria made her decision. She would take it back to the ship, she would study it, and uncover its secrets, no matter the risk. It was a risk she had to take for the future of humanity. Back aboard the ship, the artifact sat quietly in a secure lab, its glow dimming, as if it too had grown accustomed to the sterile environment. Aria sat before it, her fingers brushing lightly over its surface as her mind replayed the visions from the chamber. She had felt something, a connection, a stirring deep within herself, but the implications of that feeling were still unclear. The crew was eager to begin their analysis, but Aria was cautious. The visions had been vivid, but were they a warning or a sign? She could not shake the unsettling sense that the artifact had chosen her, and perhaps no one else was meant to touch it. Her first officer, Kellen, was the first to speak up as he paced the lab. "Captain, what do you think we're dealing with here?" His voice was steady, but Aria could hear the edge of excitement in it. "This thing's beyond anything we've ever seen. It could be a relic from a long-lost civilization. Or it could be something far older," Aria interrupted, her voice more serious than usual. "Something that predates even the races we know of. Something we were never meant to find." The crew gathered around the table, a mix of scientists, engineers, and analysts, all focused on the glowing device. Aria had ordered them to proceed with caution, but the need for answers was pressing. They hooked it up to their ship's advanced scanners, trying every known method to extract information from the device. But the results were always the same. No readable data, no code, no energy signatures that matched any known source. Arya could feel the weight of the device's mystery bearing down on her. She had to understand it. She wasn't sure why, but there was a sense of urgency gnawing at her. The artifact pulsed again, a subtle vibration in the air. She instinctively placed her palm on it, and the world around her blurred once more. In the fleeting moments of disorientation, Arya's mind was flooded with images, fragments of long-forgotten knowledge. She saw human figures, distant ancestors, standing tall among the stars, their faces etched with determination, their hands raised as if manipulating the cosmos itself. The images flickered and merged into something else, a swirling vortex of energy. A force, not unlike the one she had felt in the chamber, rippling outward, bending the very laws of physics. She heard whispers in a language that was not her own, but somehow felt familiar. It was as if they were speaking directly into her mind. Suddenly, the vision stopped, and Arya gasped for breath, her hand still resting on the device. Her mind reeled, struggling to process what she had just witnessed. There was no denying it now. This wasn't just an artifact. It was a conduit, a link to something beyond the limits of human understanding, something capable of altering reality itself. She knew now that the power within the device wasn't just for exploration or knowledge. It was something more dangerous, more potent than anyone could have imagined. Arya looked up at her crew, her face pale but resolute. "This device," she began, her voice low, "it's not just a relic. It's a key to something we've never even dreamed of." Kellen narrowed his eyes, sensing the gravity in her tone. "What kind of key?" "To the deepest potential of human existence," Arya replied, her voice tinged with awe. "And if we don't understand it soon, we might find that it understands us instead." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. They had found something that could change everything. And yet, as they realized, they were only beginning to scratch the surface of its true power. The only question now was whether they were ready for the truth, or if they would be consumed by it. Arya couldn't shake the pull of the artifact. Every moment it sat there on the lab table, its faint pulse like a heartbeat. It gnawed at her mind. She knew she couldn't keep it hidden forever, not from her crew, and certainly not from herself. The visions, the whispers in that strange, ancient language, they had made it clear. This was more than just a discovery. It was a doorway, and she could feel it, growing stronger with each passing day, each lingering touch. The power of the artifact was waiting to be unlocked, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. Late one evening, as the hum of the ship was the only sound breaking the silence, Arya found herself alone in the lab once again. The crew had long since retired for the night, but she couldn't sleep. Every fiber of her being was drawn to the device. It had shown her glimpses of unimaginable potential, and deep down, she knew she had to test it, understand it, control it. If anyone was going to harness this power, it had to be her. She wasn't sure why, but it felt like destiny. With a trembling hand, she reached out and touched the artifact once more. The instant her skin made contact, a jolt of energy surged through her body. Her breath caught in her throat as her vision blurred, the room around her warping. For a split second, it felt as though time itself bent, slowing, stretching, folding inward like a wave crashing against the shore. She steadied herself, her eyes wide with shock, but she didn't pull her hand away. This time, the artifact felt different. The power was more intense, more direct. She closed her eyes and concentrated, attempting to focus her mind. The first time had been an accident, an overwhelming, uncontrollable rush of energy. But this time, she was ready, or at least she hoped she was. Her thoughts turned inward, to the ship, to the systems she knew so well. The power seemed to respond to her focus as if it were an extension of her own will. Slowly, with a concentration she'd never known she was capable of, Area willed the ship's artificial gravity to fluctuate. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in the weightlessness around her. But then, with more force, she increased the effect. The floor beneath her seemed to ripple, and she felt herself float gently off the ground. She opened her eyes and gasped as she saw the rest of the lab shift in response to her will, objects floating in midair as though suspended by invisible strings. A sense of exhilaration surged through her. The possibilities were endless. She could control the very laws of nature, bend them, twist them. She wasn't just controlling gravity anymore. As she focused, the lights in the room flickered, responding to her command. The walls seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. For a moment, she felt invincible. But then, her focus wavered. The effects grew erratic. The gravity she had manipulated reversed violently, pulling her toward the floor with sudden force. The objects in the room collided with each other in a chaotic crash. Area gritted her teeth, struggling to maintain control. She pushed harder, but the power was slipping out of her grasp. The artifact pulsed brighter, faster, feeding on her anxiety and desperation. She could feel the energy building within her like a storm threatening to break. With a final desperate thought, she released the hold on the power, letting it dissipate. The room fell silent. Everything settled back into place, as if nothing had happened. Area stood there, breathing heavily, her body drenched in sweat. The ship's systems had returned to normal, but her hands trembled as she realized just how close she had come to losing control. The power was immense, but it wasn't something she could wield recklessly. She had felt it, how easy it could be to slip into chaos. This was just the beginning. She hadn't even begun to scratch the surface of what the artifact could truly do. But there was no turning back now. Area knew that she had tapped into something far beyond human comprehension. The future of humanity rested in her hands. The feeling of power had not left Area after her experiment in the lab. It lingered within her like a shadow, a constant hum beneath her skin, urging her to explore more, to understand more. The power had felt intoxicating, like she could bend the very universe to her will. But now, as the ship made its way toward a diplomatic mission on a nearby star system, Area couldn't shake the growing unease deep within her. She had barely scratched the surface, and yet the consequences of her actions had already begun to ripple outward in ways she couldn't foresee. It was supposed to be a simple mission: meet with the leaders of a neighboring alien species, exchange information, reinforce alliances. Nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, as the ship neared the planet's orbit, Area couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was off. It wasn't the planet itself. No, the diplomats were expecting them. But the communications had been odd, the signals slightly off. She had chalked it up to standard interference, but now she wasn't so sure. Her first officer, Kellen, had come to her side as they approached the planet. His face was tight with concern. "Captain, we're picking up an unknown ship on the edge of the system. It's moving fast. Too fast for standard travel. And it's not responding to our hails." Area felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "What do you mean, unknown ship?" "No scheduled arrivals. No military vessels in the area." "None," Kellen replied. "It's as if they've appeared out of nowhere." Area's heart began to race. She couldn't afford to ignore it. The diplomatic mission was now in jeopardy. She gave a sharp command for the ship to change course, bringing them closer to the mysterious vessel, hoping to make contact. But before they could reach a safe distance, the unknown ship fired. The sudden jolt of the attack sent Area stumbling, her vision swimming. The impact had come from nowhere, the force so violent that the Nova's shields buckled under the strain. Her thoughts raced. Who would attack them here, in neutral space, where no conflict was expected? "Shields down to 70%, yelled one of the engineers from the back of the room. "We're taking heavy damage on the port side." Area's mind raced even faster, and before she could fully process the danger, a surge of energy filled her. The artifact, its pulsing power, seemed to rise within her, as if responding to the threat. Her heart pounded, but she didn't hesitate. She reached for the power again. But this time, Her control wasn't as practiced. Desperation fueled her actions. She stretched her thoughts outward, not to simply affect her surroundings, but to directly disable the enemy vessel. For a fleeting moment, everything stopped. The ship trembled, then buckled, as the fabric of space around them seemed to warp. The enemy ship's weapon systems froze mid-firing, their cannons suspended in time, as though the laws of physics had briefly unraveled. The stars outside the viewport twisted and swirled, creating a sickening vortex of light and darkness. Aria's heart skipped a beat. She had done it. She had neutralized the threat. But the feeling didn't last long. The power surged again, this time uncontrollably. The ship's surroundings shuddered, and Aria could hear the groaning of the walls. The fabric of space-time had been distorted in ways that defied understanding. The ship lurched to one side as an unnatural force pulled at it, the systems going haywire. The light in the room flickered, fluctuating like a faulty hologram. The stars outside seemed to warp and twist into unnatural shapes, bending and pulling into something unfamiliar and terrifying. "No," Aria gasped, her hands flying to her temples. She could feel it. She had broken something, torn a hole in the very fabric of reality. The artifact's power had been too much, too fast, and now they were paying the price. The space around them was destabilizing, slipping through cracks that should never have existed. "We need to regain control," Kellen shouted, his voice frantic. Aria struggled to maintain her grip on reality, but she knew it was slipping. In that moment, she realized the true cost of what she had done. The power within her was not just a tool, it was a force that could tear the universe apart. As the ship groaned, and the stars outside twisted unnaturally, Aria understood that she had unleashed something far beyond her control. Something that could destroy them all if she couldn't fix it. But the damage was done, and the future was uncertain. The artifact had shown her its power, and now she had seen its consequences, and there was no turning back. The aftermath of the incident was nothing short of catastrophic. The Nova, battered but functional, had managed to regain some semblance of stability, but the damage to space-time itself had left ripples across the galaxy. The mysterious enemy ship had been obliterated, but the consequences of Aria's actions went far beyond her immediate surroundings. The star system had been thrown into chaos. The ships caught in the distorted space had been lost, unable to navigate or communicate, and the fabric of reality itself, torn and warped, had left permanent scars. News of the anomaly spread quickly. The Galactic network was abuzz with reports of the event. And not just the attack. No, it was the ripple in space-time that caught everyone's attention. Scholars, diplomats, and military forces alike were terrified. The question was no longer whether the human race was a threat. It was how dangerous they had truly become. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The representatives of hundreds of species gathered together in the holographic chambers to deliberate on the implications. Aria sat in her quarters aboard the Nova, watching the proceedings from the distance. She knew she should have been there, defending herself, but she couldn't bring herself to show her face. The magnitude of what she had done was too much to ignore, and she wasn't sure how to explain herself. How could she explain the power she had unleashed without sounding like a threat to every living thing in the galaxy? Kellen stood at the doorway of her quarters, a grim look on his face. "Captain, they're calling it the human catastrophe." Aria closed her eyes and rubbed her temples, trying to steady the thoughts that swirled in her mind. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Kellen. You have to believe me." Kellen stepped into the room, his eyes filled with concern. "I know you didn't, but you can't deny what just happened. The entire system's been thrown into chaos. They're calling for an investigation into the artifact, into everything we found on that planet. There's talk of humanity being banned from further exploration." Aria clenched her fists. "They can't do that. If they do, they'll be locking us away forever. We need to show them that we can control this power. We need to prove that we're not a threat." Kellen sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not just about control anymore, Captain. It's about fear. The galaxy is scared, and they have every right to be. You unleashed something that nobody can explain, and now they want answers. The Council's already talking about sending a delegation to retrieve the artifact. They think it's too dangerous to leave in our hands." Aria's stomach tightened at the thought. She had already realized that the artifact was more than just a relic. It was a power that could change the galaxy forever. If they took it from her, it could be used against humanity, or worse, fall into the wrong hands. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on her chest. "The galaxy won't understand," Aria muttered, more to herself than to Kellen. "They'll never understand what this means, what it could do for humanity. It's not just power, it's the potential to shape reality itself." Kellen studied her carefully. "And if it falls into the wrong hands?" Aria didn't answer at first, the gravity of his question sinking in. The thought of the artifact being taken from her, of someone else using it for their own ends, filled her with a deep sense of dread. The power was too great. It could turn the tide of any war, reshape entire civilizations, even alter the very nature of existence. Humanity had stumbled upon something no one was ready for, including themselves. But as the Council's deliberations continued, the situation grew more dire. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer the innocent explorer. The artifact had drawn the attention of every faction in the galaxy. Some were already discussing how to seize it, and many were already branding Aria and her crew as potential enemies. The only question now was whether humanity could overcome the fear and suspicion of the galaxy, or whether they would be marked as the greatest threat to the universe's very existence. The decision was no longer in Aria's hands alone. The future of the galaxy now hinged on what humanity would do next, and whether they could prove they were worthy of the power they had unleashed. The days that followed were filled with tension, the air aboard the Nova thick with anticipation and fear. The communication channels were flooded with messages from the Galactic Council, diplomatic envoys, and even military factions. The situation was escalating beyond what Aria had ever imagined. Her actions had made her a target. But worse, they had cast humanity in a light it was not prepared to handle. The artifact had become a symbol of both their potential and their danger, and the galaxy was uncertain how to respond. The ship was in orbit around a remote space station, awaiting orders. The Council had decided to send a delegation to meet with Aria. Though the intention was clear, they were there to assess the threat she represented. The representatives were not coming to negotiate. They were coming to determine if humanity should be allowed to continue exploring, or if the galaxy would act to contain the threat before it could spiral out of control. Aria sat in her quarters, staring at the holographic display showing the ongoing council meeting. Every word, every gesture felt like it weighed 1,000 tons. She was being scrutinized, her every action measured. It wasn't just her reputation that was on the line. It was humanity's place in the galaxy. A single misstep, a single sign of weakness, and the galaxy could unite to take the artifact from her, or worse, to destroy it. And with it, the hope it represented. Kellen entered without knocking, his face grim. "Captain, they're moving forward with a vote. The Council is split, but there's a growing faction that wants to take the artifact from us. The military has already begun mobilizing, just in case." Aria closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I knew it was coming. The fear is too strong, but we can't let them take it." Kellen hesitated. "Aria, are we sure we can control it? The power you tapped into, it's not something we fully understand. We don't know what the long-term effects could be." She stood, walking toward the viewport and gazing out at the cold, distant stars. She had been asking herself the same question for days. Was she truly in control of the artifact's power, or was it manipulating her? The lines were starting to blur. The more she used it, the more she felt its hold over her growing, like a silent, insidious voice urging her forward, promising untold possibilities. But at what cost? "I have to try," she said quietly, more to herself than to Kellen. We can't let fear define our future. Humanity has always risen above its challenges. This is no different. But if we don't take a stand now, we'll be forced into the shadows. We'll never have a chance to explore the potential of what we've discovered. Kellen nodded slowly, clearly torn. I just don't want to see you lose yourself in it. I won't, Arya said firmly. But deep down, she wasn't sure anymore. The door to the bridge slid open, and the rest of the crew filed in, their faces just as anxious as her own. The atmosphere was tense, and there was an air of uncertainty hanging over them. They were no longer just explorers. They were now the focal point of a galactic crisis. The mission had evolved from one of discovery to one of survival. We've just received a message from the delegation, Kellen reported. They're coming aboard, and they'll be here within the hour. They're demanding the artifacts transfer. Arya's pulse quickened. The countdown had begun, and she was running out of time. She had to decide. Would she hand over the artifact and risk humanity being subjugated by fear, or would she fight to keep it, knowing that it could tear the galaxy apart if used recklessly? Her mind raced with the implications. If she allowed the Council to take the artifact, they would dissect it, study it, and perhaps lock it away for eternity, out of fear of its power. But if she kept it, if she continued to wield its influence, she could be seen as a tyrant, a danger to everything the galaxy had worked to build. Arya knew one thing for certain. The decision she made next would shape the future of humanity. Would they stand as equals among the stars, or would they be cast into darkness, feared and isolated forever? She could feel the weight of that choice pressing down on her, and for the first time, she wondered if she was truly ready for the responsibility the artifact had bestowed upon her. The hours stretched thin as the Nova remained in orbit, every crew member on edge. The delegation from the Galactic Council was en route, their ships now visible on the scanners. They were coming, and they would not be leaving without the artifact. Arya knew it. The tension in her chest was palpable, each breath a struggle to stay composed. The artifact's presence still thrummed within her, a constant reminder of the power she had unleashed and the decisions that lay before her. On the bridge, the crew was silently preparing for the worst. They had all witnessed the damage Arya's connection to the artifact had caused, had seen the universe itself tremble at its influence. Yet they remained by her side, unsure of what they should do. They trusted her, but the galaxy was no longer so kind. Kellen approached her quietly as the others went about their duties. We've done all we can, Captain. They're coming, and they want answers. Arya turned to face him, her gaze steady but clouded with doubt. I know, and I'm not sure I have any answers left to give. A heavy silence lingered between them. The weight of their situation was suffocating. Arya had tried everything, diplomacy, negotiation, but nothing would deter the Council. They had seen the artifact as both a blessing and a curse, and now they feared it more than anything. Fear had taken root in their hearts, and fear could never be reasoned with. The door to the bridge slid open, and the crew fell silent as Arya's second-in-command, Lieutenant Brenna, stepped forward. Her face was a mix of resolve and worry. Captain, the Council delegation's ships are entering our range. They're demanding immediate access to the artifact. They want us to power down our shields and prepare for boarding. Arya's heart raced. The moment had come. Kellen's voice cut through the tension. What are we going to do? If we comply, they'll take it from us. If we refuse, we risk an all-out confrontation. Arya swallowed hard, her throat tight. She could feel the artifact's presence inside her, urging her to take action. She had already tampered with the laws of nature before. Now, the stakes were higher. If she didn't act, she would lose everything. She would lose humanity's place in the galaxy, their future, and perhaps her own soul in the process. The artifact was humanity's greatest discovery and their greatest weapon. If the galaxy feared it, she would show them that humanity could wield its power responsibly. I won't let them take it, Arya said, her voice firm. We'll stand our ground. But the consequences, Kellen started, his voice filled with doubt. I'm not asking for your approval, Kellen, Arya interrupted. Her voice softened, but carried a quiet determination. I'm asking for your trust. For a moment, there was no response. But then Kellen gave a slight nod, his eyes reflecting the same storm of uncertainty and hope that Arya felt within herself. All right, Captain, Kellen replied, his voice tight. We'll stand by you. As Arya turned back toward the viewports, the delegation's ships appeared on the scanners, vast, sleek, and imposing, like harbingers of judgment. The darkness of space seemed to stretch around them, threatening to engulf everything in its path. Prepare the ship, Arya ordered. Engage the shields and lock down the artifact room. No one gets near it unless I say so. The crew moved quickly to follow her commands, the ship humming with activity. Arya could feel the tension building, a quiet storm gathering just beyond the horizon of her decision. She had no illusions about what was coming. The Council wouldn't back down, and neither would she. The faint hum of the artifact pulsed again, this time more urgently, as if it too could sense the impending clash. Arya reached out to it with her mind, as if trying to reassure it that she wasn't letting it go. She wasn't letting humanity go either. As the first alien vessel docked with the Nova and the airlock hissed open, Arya's grip tightened on the console. She knew the moment had come. There would be no turning back. The galaxy was about to witness humanity's resolve, and Arya would do whatever it took to ensure that their future was not determined by fear alone. She had no choice now but to lead them into the unknown. Captain, they're boarding. Brenna's voice cracked over the comms. They're here. The weight of that moment bore down on Arya, but she steeled herself. She wasn't just fighting for control of the artifact anymore. She was fighting for the future of humanity itself. The doors to the bridge slid open with a mechanical hiss, and the Council's delegation filed in, their presence commanding and cold. Arya stood tall at the center of the room, the weight of the artifact's power still pulsing within her. The air felt thick, charged with the tension that had built up over the past days. Every step she took, every breath she drew, seemed to echo with the impending consequences. Her crew stood silently by her side, all eyes on her as the delegates entered. They were here not to negotiate, but to judge, and in their hands lay the fate of humanity. The leader of the delegation, a tall and dignified figure from the Therium species, stepped forward. His skin shimmered with an iridescent sheen, his eyes cold and calculating. Captain Arya, he said in a voice that carried authority. We have come to discuss the artifact. The power you have tapped into cannot be allowed to remain unchecked. The balance of the galaxy is at risk. Arya's heart beat faster, but she remained firm. The galaxy was afraid, and she understood why. The artifact in their eyes was a weapon that could not be controlled. It was something that could tear the very fabric of existence apart. But she refused to back down. Not now. I understand your concerns, Arya said, her voice calm but unwavering. But you don't see what I see. You don't understand the potential of what we've discovered. The Therium leader's eyes narrowed, and the room seemed to grow colder. What you have discovered, Captain, is a force that could tear apart the very fabric of space-time, a force that could warp reality itself, and you intend to keep it. I intend to learn from it, Arya replied, stepping forward. I intend to use it to ensure humanity's future, to shape it, not destroy it. If we're careful, if we're responsible, this power can change the galaxy for the better. No longer will we be the weak, vulnerable species we once were. We have a chance to evolve, to rise above. The delegates exchanged looks, their skepticism palpable. The Therium leader spoke again, his tone growing sharper. This is not your decision alone, Captain. The Council has already voted, and the majority is in favor of confiscating the artifact for study, for the safety of all. Arya's stomach clenched at the words. The Council had made its decision. They were going to take it from her, but she wouldn't allow it. She knew what it could mean for humanity, for their future in the galaxy. The artifact was their ticket to greatness, their potential to become something more. And she would not let fear and prejudice decide their destiny. "No," Arya said, her voice ringing out with a finality that left no room for argument. "The artifact stays with us." The tension in the room escalated instantly. The delegates bristled, and one of the military representatives stepped forward, his hand hovering near his weapon. "You will regret this, Captain. You're not just defying the Council. You're defying the very order of the galaxy. And that will have consequences." But Arya stood firm, her resolve unshakable. She felt the artifact's power surge within her, not as a threat, but as a promise. The galaxy may have feared what humanity could become, but Arya knew that humanity had always been defined by its ability to rise above fear, to overcome its limitations, to shape its own fate. "You may fear us now," Arya said quietly, her eyes locking with the Therium leaders. "But in the end, you will see that we are not the threat you think we are. We are the future." The room was silent. No one moved. The delegates stood frozen, uncertain of how to respond. Arya could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she held her ground. She knew that what she had just done was a turning point, not just for her, but for humanity itself. The Therium leader's gaze softened ever so slightly, though his resolve did not waver. "You are a brave woman, Captain," he said, his voice low. "But bravery alone cannot change the course of history." Arya met his gaze, her eyes filled with unwavering determination. "No," she replied, "but it can shape the future, and we're not backing down." In that moment, she understood the true cost of her decision. There would be no easy path forward. The galaxy would not welcome them with open arms. The artifact would continue to draw both fear and fascination. But humanity had made its choice, her choice. They would fight for their future, no matter the cost. As the delegation retreated, the door sliding shut behind them, Arya stood in the silence of the bridge, knowing that the road ahead would be difficult. But humanity's destiny had been set, and she would lead them to it, no matter where it took them. The universe would soon learn that humanity, for better or worse, was no longer a species to be underestimated.